Alright folks, today I'm going to review two swords from LK Chen, the Magnificent Chu Jian and the Flying Phoenix. We'll start with the older one, which is this. By the way, the term Jian, as far as I know, simply means sword and refers to double-edged blades compared to the Dao, which is a single-edged blade. It's based on finds in tombs from the time period 315 to 221 BC. At that time, bronze swords were also still in use. And it's got that double fuller that you also see on some of those bronze swords. This was during the late Warring States period, and at that time it was noblemen who were able to become professional warriors, and the design reflects that. It's pretty ornate, so this is not the kind of sword that you would see in the hands of a commoner, which means I'm defiling it with my non-aristocratic grubby hands right now. The blade is 1065 carbon steel, pattern welded with T8 tool steel. T8 is an alloy which contains tungsten, cobalt, chromium, and vanadium. Tungsten refines the grain size and increases the hardness. Cobalt, chromium, and vanadium improve strength, and chromium also improves corrosion resistance and wear resistance. The blade is tempered to a hardness of 55 to 58 HRC, which is quite hard. And I've definitely noticed that. It has really good wear resistance overall. In fact, from the test cutting I've done so far, I'm not noticing any real reduction in sharpness. There's no edge damage at all. It has held up pretty well. There are some superficial scuff marks, but not a lot of scratching. So it does definitely seem more durable than some other types of steel that I've tried. And I did notice the increased corrosion resistance compared to just 1065, as it just doesn't stain as quickly. I've had some swords that when you cut tatami, you have to wipe them down immediately. If you just let them lie around for just 15 minutes or half an hour, you immediately get stains and they tend to start to rust pretty quickly. This really doesn't. So this is easier to maintain, which is nice. It's got bronze fittings, this disc pommel here, and the guard, which is really just there to prevent your hand from slipping up onto the blade. When you thrust with it, it's not there to protect the hand, it's just too small for it. It's got a cord wrap, I don't know what material it is, but it feels really good in the hand. And it's very tight with the exception of the top layer. It has an extra layer here where it's basically, it acts like risers. And this is the only thing that annoys me about it. The top layer has come loose and that shifts around a little bit. It's really not a big deal and you could always take that off. As far as the handling is concerned, when you first pick this up, you're like, whoa, this is nothing. It's very, very light. Now, on my scale, it weighs 795 grams or 1.75 pounds. The balance isn't extremely close to the guard, which you wouldn't want anyway, with a blade, with such a light blade, because you want enough blade presence to have some authority in the cut. It has a very noticeable distal taper. The blade is 7.3 millimeters thick near the guard, and near the point, it gets as thin as 1.64 millimeters. So that's a very substantial taper, which of course also gives you that lively feel. Plus the fullers again are there to reduce weight. So the blade overall is relatively thin, but it also has the fullers, and that together with the distal taper just makes the handling, the balance just about perfect. This is really nice. When you pick this up immediately, you feel like, yep, this is a sword that will just want to move around in your hand. Yeah, it's possessed, it wants to do things. For thrusts, if I were to evaluate this like a rapier, it would seem like you don't have as much point control aside from what the weight gives you. But you also have to keep in mind that in Chinese swordsmanship, you have a different kind of motion. It's not the rapier disengage, but you pivot it in a different spot. I'm not good at that, but if you pivot it in a different spot, then you can definitely tell that this is definitely well balanced for thrust as well. And overall, it handles beautifully. In the cutting, and by the way, if you haven't seen the video of the full cutting footage, it's linked in the video description below. This got a bit of an unfair shake compared to the Flying Phoenix because I've practiced two-handed cutting way more. I've never been as good with single-handed cuts, and of course you can't be as good with one hand as opposed to two because you don't have that extra stability and control. But when I focus, it does cut quite well. It also seems like a pretty stiff blade when you're handling it, but it flexes quite substantially. When you put it on the ground and flex it that way, you can definitely tell that it can flex pretty far and spring back to true. But it doesn't feel whippy in any way, shape or form. In fact, it feels like you could deliver very effective, powerful thrusts with this blade because of the geometry. And speaking of which, it's a very pretty blade because of the double fullers, and you have a very pronounced central ridge as well. That looks great along with the pattern. So visually, definitely a very appealing sword, but it's also designed with practicality in mind. And this kind of edge geometry here is really good. Even if the apex of the edge dulls with how thin it is and with how well it tapers, this should still deliver a pretty effective cut. So that's nice. Oh, by the way, the disc pommel here at the end, I've heard that it's designed to be able to push against it. I think it was Sword Sage who pointed that out, that you can use this for a more effective thrust. I don't know if they used it that way during that time period, but it definitely makes sense. I could imagine that being done. As far as historical accuracy is concerned, I know that they've put a lot of research into this, looking at the originals and trying to get as close to them as possible for these reproductions. I've never handled the originals, so I can't make any statements about how close they are to the originals. I don't have the comparison, but I can definitely say that just going by feel, you can tell that yes, this is a properly designed, real sword that you could absolutely use in battle if you had to. It's fast, it's well balanced, it cuts well, it's really good in the hand, feels secure, and there's a lot of things to like about it, really. The scabbard is also quite nice. It's decorated as well. It's got this brass loop here to wear on your belt. It's quite nice. And I like the diamond cross-section of the scabbard. It's also a really good fit. In fact, if you push it all the way where it's flush, you can see that it lines up perfectly. And it's almost a bit too tight. You definitely have to, not really, but you got to give it a firm tug, which is what you want. So there's absolutely no movement here. It's one of the best fitted scabbards actually that I've handled so far. All right, onto the Flying Phoenix. It also comes in a decorated silk bag, and this is later than the Chu Jian. There's a short window where the two overlap, but basically this comes after, from what I understand. And so this is from the Han Dynasty, 206 BC to 228 AD, and this is specifically early Han Dynasty, so 206 to about 100. During this time, weapons were made on a large scale, so this could have been in the hands of high-ranking military, not necessarily just nobility. And it's not decorated like the other one. The scabbard is, but the guard is just plain, as well as the pommel here. It doesn't have the concentric grooves that the other one does. It's very pragmatic, fairly simplistic. This is also made of pattern welded steel, 1065 and T8. And handling on this one is even lighter than the other one. It's longer, but it's still lighter. This is 727 grams, or 1.6 pounds. And again, when you pick this up, it's even more apparent immediately. Like this, you would not expect it to be this light when you pick it up. At least I didn't. And this is, you're almost wondering, like, am I holding a sword? What is this? Is this like half ethereal or something? This one also has a distal taper. It's about 7 millimeters thick near the guard, and then it tapers down to about 2 millimeters. So again, substantial distal taper here. Pretty thin blade overall and narrow. This one has a diamond cross section. Also has the cord wrap. This one is just one layer, and the disc pommel as well. And the guard on this one is a little bit wider than the Chu Jian, but again, it's not hand protection. It's just to make sure that you don't end up on the blade, so you have something to push against when delivering a thrust. For thrusting, this should be quite good because you have a substantial profile taper as well, in addition to the distal taper. So that would be good against, probably also against armor, to be able to thrust into the gaps, or depending on the armor, if it's not metal, you should be able to just thrust straight through. And it also delivers quite an effective cut. Now on this one, I could kind of cheat. I was just applying European longsword techniques, because this is kind of like a super light longsword. Depending on which longsword you're talking about, this is basically half the weight. There's quite a range. They can be anything from about 1 to 2 kilos, something like that. But this is right about half of the average. And this is extremely fast, as you can imagine. Balance. This compared to the Chu Jian is a little bit closer to the guard, simply because it's overall longer and has a longer grip, and it feels even more lively in the hand than the other one. This is just, single hand, no problem. You can easily use this with one hand. So this could be used in conjunction with a shield or buckler, like the Han Dynasty Gorang. That would be a good option. Or you could use the extra hand for more control and power, which I like to do. It cuts beautifully. With good edge alignment and speed, this glides right through a tatami mat with minimal resistance. It'll just drop straight down. And this is also the kind of blade geometry that can continue cutting even when the primary edge dulls over time. This one more so than the Chu Jian, because this just gradually transitions all the way from the center to the apex of the edge. There is really no visible secondary bevel. There's going to be a micro bevel at the end, of course, at least I would think so. But yeah, this has very, very little resistance as it goes through the material. So this works beautifully. Also very nice scabbard on this one. And the fit on this is perfect too. Exactly the way you want it. Again, no rattle, no movement, and it's easy to draw. All right, so negatives. I always try to find negatives as well, especially when the sword was sent to me for free for review, because you gotta be aware of bias. But I'm struggling really to find anything here. The only thing that bothers me, like I mentioned, is the loose wrap on this one here. And I would imagine as you use it more, it's probably gonna get worse. Now, you can redo it, of course. Should you have to? Not really. I've definitely had swords with a wrap that is gonna last almost forever. On this one here, I don't really see that loosening up anytime soon. This seems very tight, so I don't anticipate any problems with that. I don't know how they're assembled. They might be peened. I do see a bit of a spot here where the tang might have gone through and been hammered down. But then again, probably not, because this is the same bronze color. I don't really see steel color there. So I'm not sure how the disc pommels are attached. Either way, they seem solid. The guards as well. I did a bit of wood cutting, nothing crazy, but during that I didn't notice anything loosening up, and there wasn't any significant hand shock as I was cutting into hard material. So I don't think this would loosen up really, particularly considering how tight the fit is on the guard. Basically on the Chu Jian, you can't really get it any tighter because there's the fullers, so there's always going to be a bit of space there. On this one, It's also very tight, so I'm not seeing any issue with the construction. There is something about their lightness that made me a bit hesitant to just go completely crazy and just really hack into thicker limbs like a maniac. Anyway, so I wanted to point out negatives and just started rambling about the positives again. So you see my problem here, like what am I supposed to criticize? I just don't really see anything, especially considering the price. They're well worth it, in my opinion. Right, the cross-section of the grip is also quite well done. At first glance, from the side, it can look kind of round, but it doesn't feel like it. You can definitely tell there's flat sides here, and you definitely get a solid feel for the edge alignment. So no problem there. And yeah, that's about it. You can't force it. If there's nothing negative to be said, at least nothing that I've found, then that's what it is. So personally, I prefer this one, the Flying Phoenix, simply because of the longer handle. I can use it with two hands. I mean, I tried with this as well, and I can just about cram the extra hand in there, particularly if I put the finger over the guard. I can just about kind of use it, but this is just a single-handed sword. This, on the other hand, easy, two hands. You might fit 2.5 or 3 on there, depending on your hand size. Although I will say that aesthetically, in terms of looks, I prefer this because I really like that complex blade geometry with the two fullers. It looks really nice. The guard looks great on this too. So just in terms of looks, I'd say the Chu Jian. For cutting, for me personally, Flying Phoenix is where it's at. So I'll put the links in the description down below. Check them out. Definitely highly recommended. And hope you found the review interesting. Thanks for watching and have a good one, folks.